Welcome to Sounding Board, a presentation of Seroptimist International of Novato, whose mission it is to improve the lives of girls and women locally and globally. I'm Freda Kaplan, and my guest tonight is Phyllis Gould. Phyllis came from Oregon to work in the shipyards in Richmond during World War II with her sisters and mother. And we have a photo of her and her sisters looking very clean and tidy. And I'm wondering, is that how it looked in the shipyards? Were you clean? And
Not at all.
And what job did you do there?
I was a welder.
But they call you Rosie the Riveters.
That was a term to cover women in all kinds of defense jobs, from truck drivers to airplane assemblers to working at a service station, any job that took the place of a man.
Oh, so the terminology was around at that time. It's not recent.
No, it was at that time, and there was a song, and I think there was some woman originally whose name was Rosie that they kind of used her, but no, it didn't mean any specific job.
And you did riveting, or you did welding.
Welding.
But they did riveting for airplanes, is that correct?
Yeah, the airplanes were riveted and the ships were welded.
And what year did you come here?
It was, I went to work in July of 1942.
And did the rest of your family also?
They came one at a time. I had a little boy. He was just over a year old when I went to work. So my sister Marion came down from Oregon to take care of him. She went to high school and was in an art class, and they thought she had potential, so they sent her to Cal Berkeley for 6 weeks to learn drafting. And they took her right out of the classroom as a draftsman. So other members of the family gradually came, and eventually my mom came, and so I had, my sister Marge was a welder, and Marion was a draftsman, I was a welder, and later Mom decided she wanted to join the thing too, so she became a painter.
Oh. So you painted the ships also.
What she did was, I guess her first day on the job, she was carrying a bucket of paint and dropped it. So they thought, okay, lady, you're too old for this. And she wasn't old, but they decided that she'd be okay putting masking tape around the things that weren't to be painted.
So she did that during the war?
She did that.
Wow. I recall you telling me about the arrangements at your house. So you all worked different shifts, and so then you got to share the resources there, is that?
As soon as they would let me, I went on to graveyard shift, and then my sister Marge did too. So we'd sleep in the bed in the daytime, and other members of the family slept in it at night.
It was always in use that way. Very nice. Yeah. How did you get into welding?
Well, my husband and I always went for a Sunday drive, and on this particular Sunday, another couple were there, and the guys in the front were talking about what was happening. There were shipyards in Alameda and I guess in Richmond at that time too. And so they said they wanted to get jobs, they wanted to learn to weld and get jobs as welders in the shipyard. And for some unknown reason, I really don't know why, but I just piped up and said, I'd like to do that too. And my husband was the head of the family. He took that as his responsibility to provide for his family, so he was totally opposed to me doing it. And I waited a little while, and then one day I just went to the employment office and signed up, got my Social Security card, and just went to welding school at Richmond High School, and they had it going on 24 hours a day, and they assigned me 4 to 8 in the morning. And in 2 weeks, they said I was ready to get a job.
How much did you make in those days?
Started out at 90 cents an hour, and as a journeyman welder, $1.20. And then on graveyard shift, it was $1.56.
Wow.
Yeah.
Things have changed a little.
A whole lot.
What part of the ship did you weld?
I worked on the deck houses. They were 3 stories high, but they built them. We started with a flat plate of steel, which would become the ceiling of one deck. We put the sides up, welded those, and then the crane picked them up and turned the whole thing over onto another plate of steel, which we welded to that, and went up 3 stories.
Wow. And then they put it on the ship with a crane?
After we completed the deck houses, the burners came and they cut the thing apart again into 3 sections that would fit on a rail car and go over to the ships. And then they reassembled them, re-welded the 3 parts together, and the cranes lifted them onto the ships.
And the ships were in Richmond as well?
It was all Kaiser. There were 4 different yards. Mine was called prefab, where my sister Marge was a welder and my mom was a painter, was yard 2, and Marion was at yard 3 as a draftsman.
And would you tell us what you all wore to work in those days?
There were no women's work clothes. Everything we wore were men's. The boots, the pants, the sweatshirts, which were all gray, and then the leather coveralls and the leather jacket.
Wow. Were they heavy?
Very heavy. And the big gloves, leather gloves. And if there was any overhead welding, there would be a space between the glove and your thing. I had a lot of burns there. The little round pellets would fly off, and they'd catch in your sweatshirt and just stay there and sizzle.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Whoa. Was the clothing warm?
No. There were no modern, what we call modern fabrics now. There weren't. It was cotton. I guess all of it was cotton.
And you mentioned something about your mother keeping warm. How did she keep warm?
She took ace bandages and wrapped around and round her legs to try to keep warm.
And you all were some of the first women to do this, is that right?
I was one of the first half-dozen women hired, and it took me 3 times going to the employment office because you had to join the Boilermakers Union, and they refused to take women or blacks. And so it was a struggle to get hired in the first place. And then they hired a chaperone for the 6 of us, and they didn't know what the men would do when we showed up. They really didn't know how they would react to us. But I didn't have any problems. Everybody was, they kind of laughed at us, but, you know, nothing that was objectionable. So the chaperone didn't last very long.
Yeah, that's not a very big job. How did your husband feel about this?
He was totally opposed to it. I ended up doing the same job he was doing for the same pay he was getting, and he couldn't handle it. So he just couldn't deal with that, so we split up.
What did you, in addition to building the deck houses, how many ships, how many deck houses did you all build in a day?
At one point, we were doing a complete deck house a day in a 24-hour shift.
And how frequently did they put out a completed ship?
Well, they built over, I think, 600, so they were turning them out fast. But one they just focused on to see how fast they could build one. And it was in 4 days, and I don't remember how many hours. But wow. From the time they laid the keel until it was launched. And I heard that within a week it was loaded and sailed out under the Golden Gate.
Wow. And these were troop carriers, or what kind?
No, they were cargo ships.
Oh. Wow. How many did they make in the Richmond yard, do you think?
I don't remember the total number, truthfully. Just,
when your job ended, were you disappointed, and did you become a professional welder in private life?
Nope. Very happy to settle back into being a housewife. I had met my second husband in the shipyards, and he was a burner. And
what's that?
Well, it's a torch that melts the metal. They would cut the pieces that we needed to fit in.
I see. So then you stayed with him after that. He was he was okay with you working there.
He didn't have a choice by then.
Yeah. A career had started. They've got a Rosie the Riveter monument and national park in Richmond now.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little about that and its size and shape?
I'll start with how it got started. Donna Powers was a Richmond City Councilwoman, and she said as she was campaigning and walking down neighborhood streets, she talked to all these women who had worked in the shipyards. So she thought it'd be nice if we kind of got together and maybe got a statue or something. So she put a notice in the paper for women to contact her. And it was so overwhelming, the number, that other people got involved, and in 5 years we had a national park.
That's pretty quick.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing.
And there's a statue, a monument there, and paving stones?
They had a contest to see for the design of the memorial, and it represents the length of the ship, and there are paving stones along the walkway that you walk one direction and it tells what was happening in the country at that time, and you come back the other way and it's statements from different women that worked there. And I have 3 pavers there.
Oh, So it was a memorable experience for you, and you got to write it in the forever in the stones. That's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. My name isn't on the pavers, but it is on the sign at the entrance.
To the museum.
No, to the memorial. It's little print, but it's there.
And inside the museum, there's a quote from your sister, I believe. Do you recall what that is?
I don't remember what it says. Something about she didn't do anything great, but she was part of something that was great. And that's recent because the visitor center hasn't been open for very long. And she was just stunned that they would use her quote and her name on there.
And she's a docent there.
She's a docent there,
And to be rude, how old is she now?
I'm 91, and she's 87.
And she's still leading tours.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And there are 4 other ladies that worked in the shipyards, and they're docents also, and one of them, I think today is her 93rd birthday.
That's wonderful. That's great to hear. Did you wear the outfits that I see you wearing here?
This came after the park started.
I see.
And so we took advantage of the poster that was put out during the war.
Oh, I see, yeah. And with the scarf on the head. Did you wear scarves that way?
I did, and you have to have some kind of vanity that you're a girl. So I always wore a shirt under my sweatshirt with the collar out, and if I had a pink shirt, I wore a pink bandana. So I had the bandanas that were the color of the shirts I wore.
That's great. And to have your mother there working too, the whole family in at work for the war effort.
And I'll tell you how she got hired. She was a lady who dressed up. She always wore a hat and gloves, and the first time she went to get the job, that's the way she dressed. And they said, "Lady, you really don't want a job here." So my sister talked her into wearing coveralls, and
Coming back.
And then they hired her.
Yeah. Well, after the job was done, did you continue to wear coveralls?
We pretty much went back to dresses. We wore pedal pushers sometimes, but pretty much dresses. I did have one pair of slacks that I bought during the war, and I've since donated them to the museum because they were so typical of the time. They were like, they had a wide waistband with a Tyrolean embroidery on them. And of course there were no zippers during the war. All the metal went to the defense. And so it has button plackets, and the dress I bought at that time also had the button plackets and the big padding on the shoulders.
Yeah.
So I donated that too.
So that's in the museum now.
It will be on display.
It's a wonderful museum. I was surprised. I just happened upon it, and I really enjoyed it. You need a docent, though, or somebody to explain things to you. The pictures have captions on it so that you can sort of understand, but it really takes a person to make you feel that you know the history, I think.
Well, the museum is separate from the visitor center, and the museum opened early on, and a lot of people donated things to the museum, which if they'd known there would be a visitor center later, they would have saved for that, because and it's separate from the national park. So there was kind of a rivalry. The museum got the Red Oak Victory ship, which was actually built in Richmond. So it's under the museum control, and it's kind of complicated.
But they're near each other, is that correct?
Yeah.
The museum and the visitor center. I was confusing them. Yeah. And the ship is docked nearby?
It's at Yard 3. And it's open for visitors. And it's fully restored now. So it's going to sail for the first time and take passengers on a excursion thing around the bay in the fall.
So you'll be able to book rides on it.
I
guess that's a ride on a ship.
I don't know how many times it's going to do that, but since Marion is a docent, she said, we've got to get our tickets early, so we already have them.
Oh, very wise. And there's something laid out in the park that's the same size as that ship. Is that true?
That's the memorial in the area that was Yard 2. And yeah, it's the length of the ship, and they thought in the plans that they'd have a propeller from a ship at the back end of it. Only all of those, there's none available. They still haven't found one, because so much of the metals were melted down after the war, and so it just kind of ends.
But they found that ship in the mothball fleet.
Yes, it was.
But no more, no propellers.
No.
It's fortunate that the one was preserved.
Yeah.
And that someone took an interest in restoring it.
And it was such a mess. It was really, really rusty. And Marion and I got to ride on it when they moved it from Vallejo over to Richmond. And that was there were lots of people on board, and it was a fun day. They had to tow it, but...
Yeah. You had probably never ridden on one of your ships before.
No.
They were all business. Interesting. Yeah. So this is actually in Point Richmond, isn't it? The park?
Sort of.
It's not in it's on the other side of the freeway from downtown Richmond.
Right.
It's quite a lovely place. The views are beautiful, and they've restored the buildings very nicely. It's a nice place to walk and visit, I think. The
visitor center is behind that big Ford building. It's in the old oil house. And there's a restaurant back there that is all the pipes and things are in there. It's kind of a charming place, and they've used some of the photographs to laminated on the tops of some of the tables.
What's an oil house?
I don't know what that's what the name of it. I don't know exactly what they did there, but that was...
And you mentioned the Ford plant that was there.
It was a Ford assembly plant, and I worked just down the street from there, but I didn't know that they were making tanks and things in there during the war.
People were discreet.
You didn't get curious about anything. You just went about your own personal business. And even photographs. Any photographs I have during those years were taken right in front of my house, because you didn't want to be seen with a camera. They might think you were a spy.
Wow. I see. Yeah. Well, we do have some pictures of you at your house, but none on the job. Yeah. There's some posed ones. I remember seeing a cover of the New York Times Magazine with a bunch of Rosie the Riveters, but they're posed near a ship or a part of a ship, I think.
That was me, and it was at the memorial.
Oh, when they opened that, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a lot of press still. You contributed then, and your contribution is living on.
Yeah. Well, they even contacted me to be part of the D-Day Museum in New Orleans. So I have, I'm in the home front area, and recently my son went there, and he called me while he was inside the building and tried to take a picture of my picture. It's my pictures and stories, and I can just imagine that he raised a lot of noise because he was so excited.
Yeah.
And there's one picture there of me and his dad, so he was excited about that.
And was he proud of you being a welder?
Oh, yeah.
And your daughter?
Well, my daughter is now, but she wasn't at one time because we didn't talk about what happened during the war. The men didn't when they came back, and we didn't either. And she was 16, and we went to her boyfriend's house, and he was welding on his motorcycle, and I casually mentioned that I'd been a welder, and she was just humiliated. She got over it, but you know, I'd never said anything about what I did.
Your skills.
Yeah.
Well, but now she's okay with it.
Oh, yeah.
Now that you get so much publicity. You lend her your scarf occasionally, probably.
No.
Wow. So when you left there, did you stayed at home? You didn't work at any other position?
Off and on I did. And during the Korean War, I had 2 little guys then, and I got on swing shift, so my husband could take care of the kids when I went to work. There was a factory that had made bathtubs, and they converted it to making shell casings, and it was kind of an experiment where they'd use the big press they'd have just a flat piece of metal, and they'd use this big press to make the form of the shell casing. And I was a government inspector, so you had to use a micrometer and make sure the thickness and there were no flaws. And
so you did work in metal.
Yeah,
yeah.
So I did that for a little while.
Well, it's been so interesting talking to you. Thank you for coming to our show. And thank you all for watching Sounding Board, production of Seroptimist International of Novato, where our crew, our producers, our editors, directors, everybody's a member of the club. And we also want to thank NPAT, Novato Public Access Television, Leon Johnson in particular, and Rick Tucker, the director. Thanks so much.